Does that also have you booting up Facebook Live?
Uh-huh. Yeah, that does Facebook Live. YouTube's not working for some reason.
They might be filtering you.
Huh?
They might be filtering you. They
Probably.
decided-
We're not important enough for them to filter.
You know what's really crazy about Facebook, or I'm sorry, Google, is they made their claim to fame because their algorithm was so effective.
Mm-hmm.
And they are killing their own brand in the name of their politics.
Yeah.
Because now the more people are like, well, wait a minute, I don't have any guarantee I'm actually going to get what I'm looking for through Google, because they're obviously shaping how I get to it. Because originally, Google, so set apart from Alta Vista and what was that? What was that online?
Yahoo.
Yahoo? No.
America Online.
America Online. All those other search engines. It was hit or miss whether you're actually going to get what you're looking for. Google shows up, and suddenly you were getting what you were looking for, and you were getting it quickly, right? Well, now here they are, deliberately massaging those results, meaning they're undermining their original credibility.
Yeah.
There you are. There's your monitor. You're live.
Oh, I'm live. Okay, so
hold
I'm
on just a second.
giving my little mini speech on Google there, and everybody's going to get to see it now, right?
Yeah. Google knows what you said now.
Google knows what I said. Does Google have an Alexa or a Cortana?
Well, I'm sure they've got something.
Oh man.
The NSA is listening anyway.
Anyway.
So and they've got a pipeline branching off to go to Google. So that's where Google gets all their information from. So,
Okay, that's creepy.
yeah.
Let me get this dialed in and we'll be good. All right, there you go.
I'm live?
Yeah, but is that on?
No, it's not on.
Just flip that up. Okay.
Some hillbilly stuff here.
Yeah. I won't tell you what I made that out
He's
of.
got this all MacGyver together. It's just, you know.
Do you really want to know what I made that out of?
No, I don't really need to know.
Okay.
I don't need to. I imagine if I sit here for a minute, I'd probably figure it out. But anyway, okay. So pop quiz: does America need to wake up?
I think America's already awake.
You think it's already awake?
Yeah, I did.
I think a certain majority segment is awake.
Yeah. I think the answer is false. I do not think America needs to wake up. I think they are already awake. And the real issue is, wait, they're not asleep, and they are committed to what they are hearing. Their inaction is indicative of what they already believe. We're sitting at a very precarious place in American history, if probably not world history. And currently, the choice in America is really very stark. Sit passive and allow the overthrow of the American Republic and embrace the replacement of socialist tyranny. And actually, socialist tyranny is redundant. Socialism is tyranny. There is no kinder, gentler version of tyranny. There's no better way to do communism, and which happens to be socialism. It is all tyranny. And well, of course, tyranny is tyranny. So they are redundant terms. Socialism, fascism, communism are all tyrannies. The outcomes are the same. The enslavement of the individual to the collective. The many names of disaster. If you listen to our national discourse, you will hear some iteration of all of these. And frankly, I don't care which name you attach to it. At the end of the day, you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. Actually, this is an insult to pigs because bacon is delicious.
Amen.
Amen, is that what you said? It's a little misplaced considering the Old Testament's like, don't eat pig.
And remember, some pigs are more equal than others.
Some pigs are more equal than others.
Yeah. Did you ever read Animal Farm?
No, I never did.
You
any of
never
that.
read Animal Farm.
I never did.
You need to read it.
Oh, sorry. For those of you who don't know, my name is John Immel. I've been doing tank now for what, since 2012? Yeah,
2012.
2012.
2012, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
That's a while, right?
Come a long way, baby.
Yeah, we have, right? And as I always say, I am no one from nowhere. I'm not here to impress you with my authority. I don't have any. What I am here to do is to inspire, provoke, cajole, many other adjectives, driving you towards thinking. I'm trying to give you my best rational argument and let you make up your own mind about what you think and about what you believe. Now, I've been talking in pretty much all of my other tank discussions. My place here is in the evolution of ideas and how ideas shape the course of human history and the course of human action. And I have been saying now for a number of years that you cannot abandon the principles, the ideas that founded America, and keep America. It's not possible. You cannot abandon the principles and hope to keep the freedom and liberty and prosperity that was the result of those ideas. And I've spent the last few years giving an in-depth evaluation of the ideas that built America and those ideas that have led to it, that are leading to its destruction. This has never really been a theoretical exercise, even though my emphasis is on philosophy. And I understand why most people think philosophy, they think something esoteric, they think pointy-headed academics in the ivory tower. It's not true. Philosophy is the driving force of human action. How man integrates his ideas is what gives him the impetus to go do the things that he does. Ideas are deadly serious. Ideas lead to action, but now I must kick some tail and get some people moving. This year we're going to talk about actions consistent with the ideas that founded America. So, this is the Gospel according to John Immel, 3, verses 1 through 3. All people act logically from their assumptions. It does not matter how inconsistent the ideas or insane the rationale, they will act until the logic is fulfilled. Therefore, when you see masses of people taking the same destructive actions, find the assumptions and you will find the cause. And this is what has so many people in America perplexed. We are watching the full-on meltdown of our cities. Under the guise of groups called BLM, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, etc. We see our cities under full-on assault for durations of time. But what is really curious is that we don't see any resistance to these actions. There does not seem to be a will to fight against. There is a massive power vacuum. Now, nature abhors a vacuum, man abhors chaos. This is a recipe for disaster. Something will step in to fill this vacuum and this leadership void. That is inevitable. But what isn't inevitable are the people who take that action. The inaction from people who consider themselves patriots. Well, the concern is, and the thing on social media that you inevitably see is, wake up America, the sleeping giant, wake up. I've been hearing about the sleeping giant for all of my adult life. And over the last year or so, I've realized I don't think it's asleep. I think the choice is very specific. I think it's they either agree with what they see happening or they're incompetent. Stop saying wake up America. It isn't true. Here's really what's happening. They agree. The people that you see on the streets are taking their ideas, the philosophical integration of those ideas, to its logical conclusion. And they're waging assault on America as such. The people who are doing nothing are taking the wrong action. And notice the PS. Taking no action is an action. Passivity is an action.
If I could interject something in there, maybe this isn't the appropriate place to interject it. And if I'm jumping way ahead, by all means, let me know. But we have never experienced anything like this before. This is so, what is happening is so foreign to our way of thinking that I think people know something has to be done. But since they've never had to deal with it before, I don't think they know what. And I think that's the result of the I think the result is the inaction.
Hold that thought.
Okay.
Well, and I would quickly interject. I don't know if what's going on right now is so different from 68, 69, and 70. You know, with the Detroit riots and what was going on. And basically that was the Black Panthers. And Black Panthers, BLM,
Well,
not a whole lot
ideologically,
of difference.
the Black Panthers, BLM, Antifa, et cetera, are pretty much
Yeah,
synonymously
exactly.
aligned. One of the crucial distinctions is that it didn't bleed out of Detroit. It was pretty much centralized and localized.
Yeah, it was Detroit and one other city, but I think you're right. It was mainly Detroit.
Which means what that really tells me is that philosophically the rest of the country was at no point aligned with what they saw.
Yeah.
I will talk more about what you said, Andy, here in a moment, but I am going to make this point. It actually doesn't matter. The people who are complicit with it, the people who accept the premise, the people who think that what they're seeing in the street is an appropriate expression within America, they're complicit. But not knowing is still incompetence. And this is the problem. There are far too many people unwilling to take responsibility for finding out what to do. So I have said this, I said this last year, I think I've said it at other times past. I know Andy and Paul have taken up this refrain, but never ever forget, adults get the government they deserve. And the children pay the consequences. I don't feel sorry for the adults in Seattle or Portland. I don't feel sorry for what we're seeing on the streets of Los Angeles and Sacramento and all the rest. I don't feel sorry for any of those people. They voted those people into power either because they agreed with the policies they heard out of their political leaders when they ran for office, or they refused to do what it took to prevent it from happening. Adults get the government they deserve. And don't whine to me about people being innocent. Don't complain when we lost votes and what are we going to do? This kind of hand-wringing incompetence has delivered California, Oregon, and Washington State over to the edge of Marxism. You have a moral obligation to prevent ideologies that bring about tyranny from taking over politics. Look, this is actually no joke. This is very, very, very possible. We had one city, and within that city, 3 or 4 city blocks decided to secede from the state, to call itself independent of the United States. And the political powers within that state did nothing about it. Which means they agree with the premise that there is something fundamentally wrong with being associated with the United States. Do you realize if they take that to its logical conclusion, we could be redrawing the map of the United States and eliminating the whole of the West Coast? Because the whole of the West Coast has been delivered over to effectively a Marxist onslaught. So the people that live there were either complicit in the progression, the ideological and political progression, or they were incompetent to resist it. Adults in Seattle and all these other places voted for the people who were part of the city to secede from the Union. The people of Seattle and these other states should suffer the consequences of their political actions or their political inaction. There is no excuse, and no one is innocent when tyranny takes over a free people. So I have decided that I am really not a nice guy. I know I hide it well when I'm here at Tank, but I'm really not a nice guy. My bark and my bite when I decide to bring them together are equally brutal. I've tried to be different pretty much throughout my whole life and gotten smacked around a little bit because I'm not really a nice guy. But I finally decided, you know what? I am what I am, and I'm not a politician. I'm not here to win popularity contests. I typically don't tone down my inclinations when I talk. I take off the edge of being unapologetically ruthless. But this year, that's not true. This year, I'm Amos, railing against the useless women of Israel, their nattering, quarreling, gossiping selves, and when he called them fat cows. I'm Michael Jordan, demanding that if you're going to be on this team, you're going to get in the game and you're going to play your best to win championships. And if that isn't you, go find some other losers to play with. I'm George Patton, demanding that the cowardly bastards fight. I'm Winston Churchill telling you to fight in the streets, fight in the fields, fight in the beaches, in the air, and on the seas. To fight and never, ever surrender. My intent this year is to rail against your incompetence and demand better. And now we're going to get to Andy's point. But John, how do we do that? And the mean bastard in me in that reaction wants to know why you haven't already figured it out. I don't care that it's outside your experience. You can see it as well as anybody. If you understand what America is, if you understand the liberty it provides, if you understand what it has been to the rest of the world, and you can't look down the road and see we are on a disastrous path, and realize it is your responsibility to fix it, to save it, to fight for it. What is one more guy yelling at the top of his lungs going to do for you? Why don't you already know what to do and when to do it? Why are you waiting for someone else to tell you what to do? Now, the more patient educator, intellectual leader, philosophical strategist in me says, okay, people do need a plan. People do need to know what actions to take.
Yes.
And the reality is, the political left is light years ahead of us. Light years. These are just 3 in an entire library-filled collection of books on how to overthrow countries. Karl Marx, the brainchild behind all of the socialist tyrannies on the face of the planet, he wrote, presuming you accept his premises, a very internally consistent economic and social structure. That has been the playbook from the beginning. But these two here, this is someone who was in the United States, and this is Chairman Mao, Politics and Tactics, and we're going to talk about him more at length. But in the modern age, your average, everyday college freshman co-ed gets some version of this in class on their first day of school. And they are fed a steady diet of these actions, these templates for insurrection from the moment they're educated. Some of you parents are like, I don't understand what happened to my kids. They were these sweet children, and then they went off to their first year at university, and they came back, and we just couldn't figure out how to talk to them. And now that they're seniors, they're lost. They think we're villains. That's because you didn't pay attention to what you were paying for. You didn't pay attention to the nonsense that was being filled in their heads, and you were incompetent to challenge it.
And in most cases, you paid for them to do it.
That's right. So, I'm going to give you a few minutes here. And I want you to read through this and tell me where you think we are in the course of human history.
Somewhere at the end of phase 1, heading into phase 2.
Paul, what do you think?
Guerrillas earn population support by distributing propaganda and attacking the organs of government. Escalating attacks are launched against and vital institutions. Conventional warfare and fighting are used to seize cities, overthrow the government, and assume control of the country. Well, I would say that America's kind of an anomaly in that, but phase two.
We're very close to phase 3 because I have already heard reports that Antifa is stockpiling weapons in major cities. They're ready for coordinated attacks.
I agree. I think we're, Andy, what you said, I think we're right in this transition space right here.
Yeah.
If you notice that pretty much all of the nightly riots, if you wade through the details, you'll eventually figure out that most of the targets of opportunity are federal buildings. This isn't, beyond the general mayhem and destruction of businesses as such, most of the prolonged attacks, particularly like say in Portland, the ongoing effort is to overthrow specific government centers. The entire quest over the course of the last few months to tear down statues, to eradicate our emblems of our authenticity and existence. This is right here. This is right where they are. And in my very paranoid game storming of what comes next, can you honestly imagine? Actually, I'll say it this way. I can honestly imagine the entire west coast of our country declaring itself independent from the rest of the country and accepting military aid from communist China. And if I would be highly surprised if that isn't already in the works, if there already aren't people trying desperately, or not so desperately, to organize military action off of the West Coast.
And what would make that possible is that Donald Trump has completely pulled the rabbit out of the hat.
Absolutely.
Okay, we were pretending we had a representative republic.
For probably the last 40 years, yes.
Right, and basically what he's done is he's drug it all out in the open and is facing it head on. So they know with him the gig's totally up, and if they really want to address the Trump problem, would they resort to something like that? Probably.
Probably.
Well,
and political leftists only get crazier when they're out of power.
Right.
Well, historically, they get crazier when they're out of power. This evolution, I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure there will be any restraint left. But if this is how well organized they are, the political left is, in understanding what it takes to tip the balance, to cause insurrection, and to cause an overthrow, if they know this, if they are this detailed in their plans, and this just represents the high points. His entire book, all of his work is very detailed on how to carry this out. It is no longer okay for your reaction to be a hashtag on Facebook. That is worse than kindergarten by compared to the doctorate level insurrection effort that these people are willing to put in. Make no mistake, BLM knows this. Antifa knows this. They know what they are doing. What you're seeing on the streets are not a bunch of malcontent 30-something snot-nosed kids that need spanked. These are the first forays into genuine warfare. The fact that they're just still resorting to bottle rockets and frozen bottles of water, still weapons. The fact that it looks like they're still in the dark ages in warfare doesn't change the fact that they're really testing and probing our resolve. And at the moment, we are showing we have no resolve. So I went looking for a similar action plan for liberty, and really have yet to find one that is philosophically consistent and prescribes actions consistent with defending liberty. Now, I'm going to talk about this more here in a few minutes. but I need for the newbies online, for those people who are just tuning in to me, what you must understand is the way man integrates his ideas. That process is called philosophy. And the most consistent integration is what wins. And so when I look at the, quote, action plans for defending liberty, and I watch what they talk about, I listen to what they prescribe, I realize that ultimately it's kind of like this smorgasbord. They got a little bit over here and a little bit over here, which is why they never really gain any traction. It isn't a consistent and cohesive action plan based on a consistent and cohesive body of ideas. This is based on a consistent and cohesive body of ideas. So the Founding Fathers wrote a lot about why they did what they did, even though good old George rallied his ragtag group of army, with a colonial army, to beat the British. He really didn't write rules for patriots. And most Christian thought leaders are already complicit in the Marxist revolution, so American Christianity will end up siding with tyranny, like it has the world over for most of its existence. And I know for some of you that are listening to me for fresh, you're like, wait a minute, John, that's crazy. This isn't a Christian country. Yeah, well. No, the problem is that Christianity, and I spent all of last year talking about why Orthodox Christianity, the dominant framework of American piety, leans left. I talked about that all last year, so go back and watch front to back what I talked about then. There are a few thought leaders who try to offer up an action plan against tyranny, but their message usually is some hazy portent of disaster if you don't vote, combined with the exhortation to pray hard. And then when nothing changes, they shrug sheepishly about submitting to God's plan. Well, the reality is this is no plan. And the church offers zero thought leadership, showing itself profoundly incompetent when resisting socialist revolutions. I challenge anyone to show me one country that resisted socialist tyranny, protected democracy, freedom, and capitalism in the last 200 years. If you do even a casual review of all of the governments throughout South America, all of which are very Catholic, all of them are socialist tyrannies. In fact, I will make the bold assertion that the American church will help usher in the revolution. Tyranny is in Orthodox Christianity's DNA. There are a few political strategists offering a method to sway the election, but these strategies are devoid of a philosophical cohesion. They will frame a message, however it needs to be framed to get a vote, but getting a vote and winning a war are not at all the same things. And it will pale in comparison to the full integration of Karl Marx's Das Kapital and the overthrow of capitalism as such. Karl Marx's ideas are a disaster, but they are founded on the most viciously consistent anti-human philosophy ever conceived by man, by the name of Immanuel Kant. In the world of ideas, the most consistent integration wins every single time. In my later sessions, we're going to talk about how philosophical consistency manifests itself into action. And action is what we are going to talk about in my sessions this year. I'm going to review the framework in which all human actions take place. Then we're going to lay out the moral defense of capitalism, and the moral defense of capitalism is the moral defense of America. We're going to reveal the war against reality and why it matters. And the last session is going to focus on action, action, action. Things you must do. I'm going to hammer away at this fundamental social truth. Adults get the government they deserve. There are no victims in the world's tyranny. Either men absolve themselves of the responsibility to change the government, or they agreed with the premise on which the government was founded. They are complicit or they are incompetent. In the world of government force, you don't get credit for good intentions. You are judged by this reality. Do you have freedom or do you have tyranny? You will either choose liberty and fight to the death to preserve individual rights, private property, and capitalism, or your incompetence will bring about a sweeping Marxist revolution. This sounds like a bold proclamation, but it takes about an hour's worth of effort to watch world history and know that I'm right. There is no middle ground, there is no compromise, and there is no can't we just all get along. No, we cannot. We have some new faces in Tank this year, for those of you online that are watching. So I want to review the foundations of philosophy and why they matter. So this is my contribution to the world of philosophy. Some years ago, I set out to understand, my first effort was to understand why was the church so consistently the point of tyranny or a participant in tyranny consistently throughout history. And the more I looked, did I hear something? No. And the more I looked, the more I realized that all tyrannies have these 5 fundamental attributes. And I've organized them into a web because they're not linear necessarily, they're in dynamic tension constantly. All tyrannies talk the same thing. Every one of them, every single last one of them, makes an appeal. Their ultimate metaphysical appeal is to some form of utopia. Some place where all the problems vanish in human existence, and if only everybody did the things that they prescribe, they would get that utopia. To achieve that end, typically the message starts here with incompetent masses. You must have the bulk of humanity be incompetent to know, grasp, or do anything moral in the world. This produces universal guilt. They are universally guilty of whatever this fundamental original sin is. This necessitates that someone who has a dispensation from all this bad dictate to them what is in fact good. Because they can't do it because they're incompetent, because they are universally guilty of the original sin, someone must compel them to do the right thing. The methodologies of doing that require collective conformity, because if we all achieve this collective conformity, we'll get this universal utopia. And we do that by robbing man of ambition, the abolition of ambition. Specifically, this means the eradication of the individual. Individuals have ambition. Now, for some, the word ambition is synonymous with sin. The reality is that ambition is just the drive to be better. Whether it's eat better, exercise more, walk better, run better, drive better, that's ambition. It just means to be better. But that is an individual pursuit. The definition of what is better is unique to the individual. But you cannot have individuality in a collective context to get to this utopia. This is philosophy. These are the categories of philosophy. The foundation is metaphysics, right here. This is the baseline. This is the substance, the stuff of what we know as existence. This is epistemology, and epistemology is what we know in our heads, or how we actually can identify and work in the world. What is our rational capacities? How good is man at actually being able to identify reality? The next one is ethics, and this is how we understand our values. And the next one is politics. This is how we introduce and interact between people. So we all have a political expectation. It's how I interact with other human beings. And the last one is aesthetics. And this is how this is art, and how man conceptualizes his world and then refreshes himself on the values that he has. So, philosophy is the nature of existence, which is metaphysics. How we know what we know is epistemology. How we value what we know is called ethics. How we interact with other people is called politics. how man creatively reflects his existence back to himself, is called aesthetics. So, here's what I want you to understand. This is a bi-directional relationship. So, if I can understand what your metaphysical premise is, I can with 99% consistency tell you what your politics will be. If I listen to you tell me what your politics are, ultimately I can run it back and I can begin to understand what your metaphysics are. It goes both ways. When you begin to grasp this inner dynamic, this inner relationship between all these pieces, it becomes very easy to understand what somebody's telling you. So, the metaphysical premise, the nature of existence, determines my epistemological qualification, which defines my ethical standard, which prescribes my political culture. So my foundation assumption about the nature of existence tells me how effective man is to understand the world. If man is capable of understanding the world, he has high moral value. If man is incapable of understanding the world, he has low moral value, which defines the nature of government force. If man is able to understand the world in which he lives, he has moral value. He does not need government force to tell him what to do. By contrast, if man is ineffective to understand the world, he has no moral value. He needs government force to tell him how to do good. So here we are.
Which is from church perspective, we were talking about this morning. It's just the doctrine of total depravity.
It is the doctrine of total depravity.
Right.
That's exactly what that is. This is, so incompetent masses, the original sin, total depravity, doctrine right over here. And then man is always guilty all the time, even though Jesus died on the cross, rose again. You're still a sinner, you're still a sinner, you're still a sinner. Universal guilt. That means preachers got to tell you what to do is good. They got to keep hammering you over the head. You can't possibly have any ambition of your own because you've got to submit to the local church. Because why? Because if we all collectively conform to the church and the church edicts, what do we get? Well, other than socialist utopia, we get heaven's utopia.
Okay. And this is a bookend to Andy's first session, if you listen to that, on critical race theory, right? Critical race theory is the bookend to this.
Well, I read through, I didn't actually see it, but I read through his notes, so you'll like this. Notice, and for those of you online, I'm going to dissect this a little bit now. Notice we have, so critical race theory, and currently in our current American environment, all white people are racist, right? We can't help it. Why? Well, okay, so we have universal guilt here, we have incompetent masses. I have systemic racism. I am incompetent across the board. I cannot help but to produce racism as such. Universal guilt, all white people are racists, whether they think so or not. It doesn't matter which they argue. It doesn't matter if I give a rational argument for why that isn't true. Well, I'm just doing white thinking, which means I am committing the very systemic racism they're accusing me of. How many times you heard this in church? Some variation of this exact same logic. Dictated good. Well, hey, since white people are universally racist and can't help it, and we're always going to hurt black people or people of color, whatever that means, we're going to have racism is a public health crisis. Which, well, we all know that if it's a public health crisis, then the rules of our government structure no longer apply. You don't have civil liberties as such. We already saw them turn off civil liberties across the board for COVID-19. Well, if racism is a public health crisis, then where's the Bill of Rights? What's the Constitution? Who cares?
Well, beyond that, what Andy talked about this morning is how that has jumped now into the use of reason itself being racist.
You're correct.
Right. And so, to throw in another connection with the church, Martin Luther said, what about reason?
It was
It's a filthy whore who should have dung rubbed in her face.
Yes.
Okay. So
Martin Luther, the wonderful villain.
I hate to boil it down to its least common denominator, but it is what it is.
So notice that the whole goal here is some type of tribal utopia. What do we hear out of BLM? What do we hear out of all of the various factions that are advocating the black man, the brown man, whatever, anybody who's not white? What will they have? Somehow they will have this universal, harmonious existence if it hadn't been for the white man. Racial reparations is collective conformity. In other words, if I am not in the business as a white person, somehow absolving my ancestors of their sins by the work of my brow and enslaving myself to them, I am not collectively conforming. And the abolition of ambition, this is the effort to destroy white privilege. In other words, anything that I do, anything that I accomplish, isn't really because I worked at it. It wasn't because I tried to be better. It was because I, as a white man, had some magical something that made my life simpler and easier just because I happened to be white. So as I said, all of these, collective conformity, incompetent masses, dictated good, universal guilt, and abolition of ambition, these 5 elements are in every tyrannical structure on the planet. And this is what we are currently up against. And this is what we have to figure out how to unravel and take action. Thank you very much.
Thanks for bringing me down, John.
What's that?
Thanks for bringing me down.
Bringing you down.
Well,
Well, what?
talking about it obviously isn't going to do anything. It almost seems like the solution is, first of all, recognize the game you're playing and exploit its weaknesses. If there are weaknesses. Maybe those weaknesses are, I don't think the solution is using the same tactics necessarily. It seems like their tactics, the tactics that they use, are geared towards bringing out the specific outcome that they want. But however, but if we were to use the same tactics in a pursuit of defending liberty, it wouldn't necessarily work the same way.
Why?
I'm trying to articulate it. It's in the brain. It's trying to put words to it. Because I'm thinking about the 3 steps that you showed, the 3 phases that you showed with model. Because the original, it begins with almost guerrilla tactics. Insurgent tactics. To try and undermine the foundation. I guess I'm assuming